Late at night at Buckingham Palace, a valet stood outside a closed bedroom door and listened to the King of England, alone in the dark, repeat the same single word over and over until it finally came out clean. And he knew better than to open that door. If stories like this move you, subscribing costs nothing, and more like this are already queued. The bell means you will see them. That valet and the handful of staff who shared those corridors carried this sound for decades. They said little publicly, but they knew what the confident wartime broadcasts actually cost the man who made them, because they heard the price paid, syllable by syllable, behind that door. Picture standing in that corridor, you would hear it too, and you would understand why no one opened the door. Here is the gap that the whole story turns on. The nation heard a steady king, calm, resolute, a voice that held a frightened country together. Through the wireless in the corner of every front room, those closest to him heard something else entirely. They heard a man fighting his own throat, night after night, and winning only just enough to face the microphone the next morning. And for him, that microphone was the enemy, not a tool, a trap, a small black machine that could seize his voice and expose him to millions in a single breath. So who was this man behind the door? He was not born to be king at all. He was born Prince Albert, the second son, and his family called him Bertie. His older brother was the heir. Bertie was the spare, the reluctant one, the boy who was never meant to reign and never wanted to. For most of his life, he expected to live in the shadows of the throne, not on it. And there is a small, almost forgotten fact that explains everything that followed. The stammer surfaced when he was very young, around age 7 or 8. It was not something he was born with. It arrived in childhood, and then it settled in and never truly left. 2 things made it worse. The first was his own father, King George V, a stern naval man in uniform who had no patience for hesitation. When Bertie tripped over a word, his father mocked the stumble rather than soothing it. Imagine trying to speak while the one man you most want to please is waiting for you to fail. The second was smaller and crueler in its own quiet way. Bertie was naturally left-handed. In that era, that was treated as a fault to be corrected, so he was forced to write with his right hand. Picture a child's hand being pulled across the page, made to obey against its instinct. A small boy taught, again and again, that the way he was made was wrong. And so he did the only thing that felt safe. He went silent. At formal family dinners, with the whole household seated and watching, the young prince would simply say nothing rather than risk the block that could seize his throat mid-sentence. Aides who served the family recalled a boy who dreaded being asked to speak at all, who shrank when a question came his way, who would rather be thought dull than be caught stammering in front of them. Hold on to that image of the silent boy at the dinner table. It explains everything that comes next, because everything did change. Not once, but twice. And the first change did not come from a doctor the palace approved of, or from anyone the court respected. It came from an outsider, a man the household considered beneath a prince, with methods no royal was ever supposed to try. In 1926, it was Bertie's wife Elizabeth who found him, an Australian, working in London, with ideas the palace found faintly embarrassing. His name was Lionel Logue. What Logue asked of him should have been impossible for a prince. He made Bertie lie flat on the floor of a plain consulting room and breathe from the belly, in and out, until the air moved on command. There were marbles to speak around, tongue twisters, long stretched vowel sounds held, until the throat gave up its grip. The palace thought all of it beneath a man of his rank. Bertie went anyway. Imagine a future king lying flat on the floor of a consulting room, learning to breathe. That is where this begins. Not in a throne room, on the carpet, with an Australian who called him by an ordinary name and refused to be impressed by him. And here is the part that mattered most. Logue told him the stammer was not a flaw in his character. It was a physical habit, a thing the body had learned and could unlearn. For a boy who had been mocked at the dinner table, who had been told to write with the wrong hand, that single idea landed like a door swinging open. The problem was not that he was weak. The problem was mechanical. Mechanical things can be fixed. Progress came slowly in fractions. A cleaner sentence here. A word that used to trap him. Gone. It was not a cure. Logue never promised one. But for the first time the man had a method, and a friend who stood beside him while he used it. Then the ground moved under everyone. In December 1936, his elder brother, Edward VIII, gave up the throne. He wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice divorced American, and the Crown would not allow it. So he chose her and walked away. The newspapers screamed it across every front page in Britain, and the weight that Edward set down did not vanish. It fell, unwanted, onto the shoulders of the shy second son who had spent his whole life avoiding attention. Think about that swap. The one brother wanted the throne and the words, the charm, the microphones, all of it, and let them go. The other feared both and got them anyway. Overnight, the man who dreaded a wireless address became the voice of an empire. There was no exit. A king does not get to stay silent. And this is where the account of the valet becomes the whole story, because the public saw broadcasts. Those inside the household saw what came before them, in the dark, when the doors were shut. Staff described a nightly ritual almost no one outside the palace ever knew. After the public duties ended, after the last hand was shaken and the last guest gone, the king would begin the exercises Logue had given him. Sometimes for an hour, the marbles again, the breathing, a single stubborn word repeated over and over behind the bedroom door until it finally came out clean. The valet who dressed him heard it all. He heard the exhaustion in it. He heard the frustration sharpen when a broadcast loomed the next day, when the king knew a microphone was waiting and the throat still would not fully obey. The valet knew not to enter. He simply listened through the door. One word, then that same word again, then again, until it obeyed. And before every wireless address there was another ritual. The king went through the script line by line, out loud, marking it in his own hand. He circled the words that trapped him, the hard consonants, the sounds that seized his throat mid-sentence. Then he found others he could swap in, or worked out how to slide past the bad ones without the nation ever hearing the join. A speech the country received as effortless was, on paper, a battle map, all of it, the floor, the marbles, the marked-up scripts, the hours behind the door, was preparation for a test he did not yet know was coming. The question no one in that household could answer was whether any of it would hold when it mattered most. Then came the date everything had been rehearsing for, the 3rd of September 1939, hours after Britain declared war on Germany, a frightened nation waiting for its king to speak. The red light came on, and for 6 minutes, a country heard exactly what it needed to hear. A voice that did not race, a voice that paused, where a man might pause to gather his weight before hard news, calm, measured, the voice of a king who had decided to stand between his people and their fear. That is what Britain heard on the 3rd of September 1939, gathered around wireless sets in kitchens and parlours, children on the floor, parents leaning in. What they did not hear was the fight, because inside those 6 minutes, George VI was locked in combat with his own throat, word by word. Lionel Logue stood a few feet away, watching him the way he always did, his hand ready to lift or fall, mouthing the breath, marking the beat. The king worked the script exactly as he had rehearsed it, sliding past the words that trapped him, breathing from the diaphragm the way he had learned lying on a therapist's floor years before. Every sentence a small crossing, every pause a decision, not an accident. The microphone had been his enemy his whole life. That night, with an empire listening and a war beginning, he sat down in front of it anyway. When it was over, staff said he came away drained, not triumphant. Drained, the way a man is drained after something physical, something that took everything, and under the exhaustion, quietly, something else, pride, the private kind. He had faced the worst microphone of his life, and he had held. Those close to him remembered that more than the words themselves. So now weigh the two pictures against each other. Hold them side by side. One is the resolute wartime monarch, the steady father figure on the recording, the man history hands you, calm above the panic. The other is the man behind the bedroom door, the one repeating a single stubborn word for an hour after the lights went down, the one who never fully beat the stammer. Not once, not ever. He only fought it to a draw. Night after night, word after word, he wrestled it back to even and got up the next morning to do it again. And that is the thing worth sitting with. The courage was never in winning. There was no clean win. The courage was in the choosing, in sitting down at the enemy microphone with no guarantee the words would come, and speaking anyway, because a frightened nation needed a voice, and his was the one the crown had handed him. That version of him never appeared in any official portrait. No painter captured the marbles, the vowels dragged long, the swapped words, the exhaustion. They painted the king. They never painted the fight. The next time you hear that steady wartime voice, remember what it took. That is the version you were never shown. He carried it to the end. He went on speaking, broadcast after broadcast, through the whole war and after, each one paid for in the same private hours. Before this part goes on, one small thing. If these stories move you, subscribing costs nothing, and more like this are already queued. The bell just means you will actually see them. He died in February 1952 in his sleep at Sandringham, a quiet winter house, snow on the ground, the family seat where he had always been most himself. His heart simply stopped in the night, and with it, the voice finally came to rest. No more scripts to mark, no more words to wrestle. The throat that had fought him since he was a boy of 7 was still at last. The valet who had heard every struggle said little publicly. He was not a man who traded on what he knew. He had stood outside that door for years and kept it secret the way good servants keep secrets, by simply never telling it. But the memory stayed with him, not the broadcast the world remembered, not the calm the country leaned on. What stayed was the sound. Which picture is the real king, the one on the recording or the one behind the door? By now you already know. One man, one room, one word, repeated in the dark until it obeyed. Over and over, past midnight, alone. That was the sound behind the door, and it never stopped until it did.